studio that we broadcast from. And so when I set up the studio and hit go live, that actually made me live 10 minutes ago. So if you saw me for 10 seconds, say, oops, sorry, not yet.
Yes. Hi, Mandy, and hi, Susan. You guys got here early. So there's Susan again.
Susan, hi again. And now that I got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, and by the way, thanks for giving us a little grace while we took off out of town last week.
Yeah.
If you watched any of our social media stuff, you know that we went and had some adventures in the mountains, and it was quite fun. Mm-hmm. And we just thought we might not even remember to do Tuesday night while we're on vacation. Yeah. So we thought
I was trying to remember what we did on Tuesday. I think we river rafted on Wednesday.
But I think Tuesday was one of the rain days.
Was it? Yeah.
And I remember thinking 30 minutes after class was supposed to start, we could have gone on and said something, but 30 minutes after.
Yeah, so yes, big time adventure.
Because that's still better than 10 minutes before, right?
It's true. It's better to be early than late.
So we're back. We're getting our strength back. You know how vacation will sometimes, sorry, my hair looks funny in there. You know how vacation sometimes like you get your mind back, but your body's kind of tired? That's probably a good way to describe us tonight.
Yeah.
However, as you guys heard me say 3 weeks ago also, we feel pretty strongly about this particular series. Mm-hmm. In fact, we expect to be working with the series throughout the year and even to the end of our season, which our season tends to end around the holidays sometimes.
Yeah, we usually end before the week before Thanksgiving is usually our last Tuesday night.
So anyway, but we have a lot to say. And our thing is, I've said both inside and outside, I've said for about a year and a half, if that helps you with the time frame, it would be super helpful if the leaders in our country would really give some guidance to what it means to have a healthy culture. And by healthy, I mean emotionally, relationally, mentally, spiritually healthy culture, so that not only are we trying to combat a physical virus, but we're also trying to work with the effects of significant cultural changes in such a way that we can take what's going on and make us stronger and better instead of what's happened. My concern is I've seen so much division and arguing and people really splitting, in two different directions, polarizing around those things. And so we started a series really trying to talk about the idea that there are some important things for us to know as citizens of the world, much less citizens of the United States, about how to maintain a strong and healthy set of relationships and then ultimately a strong and healthy set of our culture and society. And so first week we talked about that in general. 2 weeks ago, then we talked about the importance of critical thinking. It's one of those topics that could itself be a series because there's so many elements to being a critical thinker. I think my friend Hart Ramsey recently tweeted, the goal is to be a critical thinker, not a critical person. Or maybe it was somebody else. I hope I didn't discredit that wrongly. I saw it on Twitter, which means it's true.
Absolutely.
But either way, the point is critical thinking is about the ability to examine evidence, facts, and information instead of really being given to simply anecdotes, stories, and emotional responses. And so in talking about critical thinking, it's one of the most important things because in the midst of what's going on in our culture right now, we're bombarded with information, some of which, is likely to be accurate, some of which is likely to be distorted, and some of which is likely to be 100% inaccurate. And the ability to sift and sort through that is a crucial piece of really maintaining some level of sanity, but also some level of relational health through that process. Because if you're not a critical thinker and you're letting other people do the thinking for you, you can end up really divided from people and not even understand why. You may simply think they're wrong and you're right. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we have a lot of that going on in our culture. They're wrong, I'm right, or they're wrong and we're right. And so what you see is people divided down the middle over very emotional issues, but they're divided not because they've thought it through, but rather because of the ways that they've taken in information. I'm not saying that nobody out there has thought it through. I'm simply saying it's crucial to the health of a culture that we develop critical thinking skills, regardless of where you land with that you landed there because of a careful consideration of information, data, and especially I think one of the things we talked about is learning where to get that information and data from.
Yeah.
That not every source has a particular reason for giving information, and to really think through what might be the motive or the particular, agenda for the information being provided. So I'm going to take a quick drink because my throat's already getting dry. Somewhat in line with that, tonight's part of the series is on recognizing and responding to manipulation. I actually tweeted something like a week and a half ago and just said, learn to recognize manipulation. And, if you follow me on Twitter, at Bob Hamp, in case you don't, follow me on Twitter, or at Pollynay, Pollynay, if you don't follow her on Twitter. In case you don't follow us, often the things I'm thinking about teaching or thinking about doing end up with its kind of pre-echoes. I like that.
Pre-echoes.
Pre-echoes on my Twitter feed, so that, as I'm thinking through things, I often kind of tweet the segments of thought. And so, like I said, week and a half ago, something like that, I just tweeted out, learn to recognize manipulation, which then, in my mind, has been part of my setting the stage for tonight's conversation. So I want to talk about manipulation for a second, just in a general sense, and say manipulation in many ways takes a bad rap because most manipulation is for negative purposes. Now, there's an important element to understanding what I do mean by that and what I don't mean by that. If you go to a chiropractor, they manipulate your skeleton as a way of releasing tension in between bones so that the nerves can be released to function properly. And that manipulation is not a negative thing. In fact, it's a positive thing. But the thing to note about that kind of manipulation is if you were going to use that as a definition of the term manipulation, it's an unnatural means of moving something that's designed to move naturally, or an unnatural means of changing something that's designed to change naturally. Hence the term manipulation. A chiropractor who manipulates for positive intent does for your body what your body, for whatever reasons, has been unable to do or unwilling to do for itself. I've often said that sometimes a therapist, which I'm a licensed therapist, similarly does the same thing when the human mind is trapped. So when the human mind is trapped, we help people out of that trap by a form of manipulation called therapy, where we're in the same way that a chiropractor unleashes a natural process, not an unnatural process. A counselor, therapist learns to unleash the natural processes of the mind, so that when someone is trapped inside, whether circular thinking or obsessive thinking or an emotional loop or whatever it might be, we've learned ways to help people break out of those loops. And in doing so, you could call that manipulation. Now, main reason that the word manipulation has taken such a negative rap is because most of the time manipulation is a negative process, i.e., it's an unnatural means of achieving something that's designed to happen naturally. I've heard said a couple different times by political figures that, hey, it might be illegal, but at least it works. Now, I actually saw that as a headline, which is a great example of what I want to talk about tonight, is that we can often be manipulated by words, but that's going to come along later in the time this evening. We'll talk about manipulation. We've got 12 people on.
Yeah.
It could also be because we weren't here last week. So, but in the meantime, I want to talk about kind of the roots of manipulation in the way that it's used negatively or harmfully. And I want to give the context that manipulation can be something that happens at a relational level, in other words, between two individuals, but it can also be something that happens at a group or cultural level. So a group of people can be manipulated, or an entire culture can be manipulated, but it starts with the roots of what happens with the manipulation between people in relationship, whether it's two people or whether it's 2,000 or 200,000 or 2 million or 200 million people or 328 million people, whatever the case might be. So manipulation, the way that we'll talk about it tonight, the unnatural means used to get things done, it's a difference between using emotions to accomplish change versus using information to make things change. So the way I've always defined manipulation in a counseling setting, not in the positive sense, but when it's happening in relationships or in families, is that manipulation is when people use emotions to accomplish something that they want to get done. It really begins, again, another drink. It really begins with a child who doesn't know anything except I want something and I don't have the developed mature skills to represent what I want or to ask for what I want. So I learned to use tears, tantrums, anger, whatever it might be. I learned to use emotions to get my parents to respond a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So hang on. Still drinking this lovely, what do they call it? Cold infused tea.
Cold infused.
So good.
Yeah, that's good.
And so the distinction that I want to set up throughout this time tonight is the difference between getting things done through the misuse of emotions versus getting things done through the proper use of information and conversation. So let's say between Polly and I, let's say that I want something from her and I begin to use my emotions like, well, no one's made me a cake today. Now, note two things. Number one, the use of emotion. My face is downcast. My tone is sad and pitiful. But the second thing that you want to notice is that my communication is also indirect as opposed to direct.
Mm-hmm.
We'll say this again later on this evening, but most manipulation is done through indirect communication and the misuse of emotions. But those two things together is a powerful influence on people when communication is indirect and emotions are the tipping point or the driving force. Then we're in the arena of manipulation. So I say to Polly, well, no one's made me a cake today.
You poor thing. I'll make you a cake.
Look, it worked. So my manipulation, she's like, oh, I'll make you a cake. All right.
Chocolate pie.
Nice. But my manipulation is designed to get what I want using my emotions and indirect communication. Think about what we teach about abuse and think about where we're assigning responsibility when we communicate indirectly and use emotions.
Mm-hmm.
The responsibility falls directly on Polly's shoulders to go, well, what will I do for poor Bob who's not had a cake? Now, here would be the thing. Polly, I don't know how to make a chocolate cake and I'm really craving one. Would you be willing to make one for me? Do you want to say it or you want me to say it?
Which am I being?
About baking.
Oh, I'm a horrible baker. I don't bake. I can bake a box of cake. But
Yeah.
Hey, are you asking me to make a cake for you or can I actually show you how to make a cake too?
Well, I was asking you to do it.
I would love to make you a cake.
But see how my communication with her was direct and I wasn't using emotions to do that. I was stating my desire and asking directly, would she be willing to do that for me? That direct form of communication isn't manipulation and it leaves her completely free to, number one, know what she's dealing with, and number two, make a choice about how she'll respond. Often when you're being manipulated, it may take a while to know what you're dealing with because what's going to happen is you'll kind of feel something before you think something.
So I actually felt like I don't know how to make this, will you make it?
Mm-hmm.
Felt manipulative.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but that could be my family of origin.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And probably because I'm sure I know how to make a cake. I was just trying to come up with a direct example of that. But
right.
Can you see how if I really did know, or if I'm a grown ass man?
Or you could just say, hey, babe, I'm craving a cake. Would you please make one for me?
Yeah.
And,
So direct and
Yeah.
specific. And I
Yeah.
just said that word on our video.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, no.
So, but the direct versus indirect, information versus emotions is the key factors that we're after tonight. So I want to talk about the three key emotions that are used in manipulation.
Sonia, we'll come back to that too, because that's a great question.
Yeah. Let's do it now since we're on that topic.
Okay.
So what would be my response when she says she can't and then feels guilty because she said she can't? Here's the thing is part of healthy communication is I own my emotions and she owns her emotions. And that's actually not as common as we like to think in our culture.
Yeah.
So I say to her very directly, non-manipulatively, I really want a cake. Would you be willing to fix one for me? And she says,
sorry, I can't right now.
But what we know from Sonia's question is she feels guilty about that. So, and her saying no to me, I have the choice of either going, oh, okay. Or I can say, all right, well, thanks for letting me know that.
Mhm.
I'll figure out what to do about that.
Yeah.
You know?
And we could even take it further. If I feel guilty, are you sure you're okay? Because I feel kind of guilty that I can't make it for you right now.
Yeah, no, I asked, and
Okay.
if you can't do it, I would want to know that. I don't want to put pressure on you to do
Okay.
something you're not free to do right
I
now.
just want to make sure we're okay with that and you're okay. And
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with us.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
cake thing secondary. You and I
Okay.
are first.
Perfect.
So,
Yeah.
but that's Sonia. So what we're after is direct in both directions. And so if she's feeling guilty and she recognizes that, knows just what she did. She said, well, I'm feeling kind of, funny about that. Is it really okay? That's put the weight back on me to affirm, if what I did was like, oh yeah, I guess it's okay.
Mhm.
Again, the indirect communication and the emotional state, I'm saying one thing, but meaning another thing.
Mhm.
And again, if she were doing what she would normally do in that setting, and I go, well, I guess so, she'd say, well, it seems to me like your reaction is different than your words. Which one should I believe?
Mhm.
Right? Direct, 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 direct. Own my emotions, own my emotions. And if I'm not owning my emotions, could then ask me to,
Mhm.
is that really what you're feeling? Because your tone and your posture communicate something different than what your words say. So that's a whole nother conversation, because we do some stuff on communication and conflict resolution and all that, which is very much connected to what we're talking about. Manipulation is when I want to use my emotions and indirect communication to influence her in such a way that I can get what I want, and she carries the burden of it, and I release the burden to her because I've sent all those covert messages her way, and she ends up acting or feeling in a way that serves my need in some way.
Yeah.
You can see with all that language I gave that just how gross and relationally damaging it is. What if not just a relationship is being manipulated, but a family by a specific family member? What if not just a family by a specific family member, but a community by community members, and on and on and on. That's why this topic is so crucial, is we've got to recognize that one of the key pieces of manipulation is that it doesn't necessarily feel at first like you're being manipulated if you're either accustomed to always carrying other people's burdens, or you simply trust and don't expect to be manipulated. You can feel like you're doing a good and healthy thing and only later recognize that you're being manipulated. So let me give you the three key emotions that really are often the centerpiece of manipulation. Think about a child, like I said, 2-year-old, 3-year-old who's just learning language. They haven't developed the mature skills of navigating communication.
Mother, father, I would love a piece of cake.
Or do they go, but I want a cake?
I want cake now.
And if they get cake for whining, guess what? You've just served them not only a piece of cake, but you've served them notice that whining is a way to get things done. And if you simply say, let's talk about how you ask for cake. If you can say it in your big boy voice, we can have a different conversation. What do you mean? Well, I mean that tone that sounds kind of like this. Why don't you say it like this, and we can talk about cake? So a child develops this sense that if I use certain emotions, then I can get what I want using those emotions. Now, let me name them, but I want to say one more thing before I name them. The other key to this is, let's say that I'm the manipulator in this case. I can either use my emotions to get what I want, or I can learn how to trigger her emotions to get what I want. And all three of these emotions that I talk about can go both directions. And it's the really insidious ones are the ones where I've matured enough, which is not really the right word, but I've grown enough in my manipulation that I can use her emotions. I just need to add a fourth one to the list. So now there's 4, not 3.
Yeah.
Because with what I just said, it makes sense that there's a fourth one, right?
Yeah.
We'll get to just a second.
Ugh,
India. Yeah. Isn't that gross? So if I'm using my emotions, it's things like, oh, I want a cake right now. But if I want to use her emotions, I might say something like, nobody made me a cake today. I'm really craving one. Now, if she's not resistant to me the way that she has learned that these big blue eyes being batted at her and my blonde hair being, sorry, that
For a coach purse,
Yeah.
we can have a talk. No.
Mm.
Wait, that's manipulation too.
So if notice how she hasn't let the guilt emotion kick in, but what I was trying to do is use her guilt against her to get what I wanted.
Mhm.
So using one of these four emotions either as the manipulator or using one of these four emotions to get the manipulated to feel these emotions are the four key emotions that often are used when people are being manipulated. I'm going to give you the first two together: fear and anger. Were you going to say something?
No.
One of the reasons I put those two together is because often when I talk about propaganda, one of the things I say is if you feel afraid of a group of people or angry at a group of people that you've had no conversation with or no interaction with, it's likely that you've already been a victim of propaganda. Propaganda is just a institutionalized form of manipulation, right? It's using emotions to get something to happen. And so propaganda uses the emotions of the recipient. When you feel angry or when you feel fear, then you've against a group of people, angry at or fearful of a group of people that you've had no interaction, no conversation with, whether that means conservative or liberal, whether that means a specific ethnic group, whether that means a specific religious group, whatever it might be, a group of people, when you feel angry at or fearful of them without any interaction with them, you have probably been a victim of propaganda, otherwise known as manipulation. Your anger, listen carefully, your anger and your fear are the most likely emotions to get you to buy things that are untrue. I'm going to say it again. Your anger and your fear are the most likely emotions to get you to take in, go ahead,
believe
and form your opinions then around things that have given no information, only emotion. Again, remember, emotion and manipulation is the opposite of information. Information is how grown people discuss things together. I think I mentioned this briefly when one of the people asked the questions about critical race theory. It was actually my son asking questions about critical race theory. One of the things that often happens is rather than give information on both sides, people use the initial CRT to become kind of a emotional trigger instead of saying, what are the ideas I'm for? What are the ideas I'm opposed to? What are the ideas I believe and what are the ideas that I think are harmful? You very seldom hear people discussing the ideas or the information. What you see is the emotional triggering of people on opposite sides of a conversation. So rather than talk about anything from CRT to masks and mandates and those kind of things, rather than talk about those things, triggering language is used to get fear and or anger in the other person so that you can slip in either misinformation or distorted information in some way that people are more likely to take in and believe. Here's why. The reason people are more likely to take in and believe information with fear and anger being attached to it is because it automatically puts you in the bottom part of your brain. You're in your brainstem. When you feel fear, when you feel anger, you're operating out of your brainstem, and the brainstem isn't the top part of your brain that's used to analyze, think through, connect, really develop sophisticated thought processes. From here down, it's easy to influence someone who's in their brainstem because they're not going to be a critical thinker if they're afraid or if they're angry. Did you hear what the left or the right did? If the next phrase can be emotionally provoking, then whatever happens, whatever you say after that, the person's much more receptive to manipulative communication if you start with fear or anger.
Read the headlines.
Read the headlines. In fact, that's one of my biases. You'll hear me say this probably several times through this. If you get your information from headlines, you are being manipulated. I did say this in the critical thinking session, but a lot of times I'll read a headline and then I'll go through the article to see if the article actually supports the headline. And often, I won't say more often than not, but often, article gives no support whatsoever to give the headline. A headline and what do they call the first sentence? There's a term for it. Someone's going to know it and put it in the comments.
Bait.
Yeah, right. The headline and the first sentence, the lead, is it the lead?
It's a lead,
The headline and the lead are designed to get you to read the rest of the article. And as a result, a headline by definition is a form of manipulation. It's trying to influence your behavior for the next 6 minutes regarding the article that follows the headline. Read the headline and occasionally kind of take a deep breath. Notice your emotional response. I always say, put your finger on your pulse. So I used to say thumb, but some medical person said that's not how you do it.
Your
Thumb doesn't have enough sensitivity.
No, there's a pulse in your thumb. Yeah.
There's a teaching in there,
Yeah.
right? If you already feel it, you can't feel anyway. So, but keep a finger on your emotional pulse. Read the headline, let the emotions pass through, then read the article to see if the headline's actually supported. And what you're going to find is often even the paragraph itself that sounds like the headline doesn't actually state what the headline, here's the term again, implies. Implication or covert communication is always the form of communication that's attached to manipulation. And so you have to be able to sort through what is it saying versus what does it sound like it's saying.
Yeah.
And you read that paragraph that's connected to the headline and go, wait a minute. I have an example in my mind, but I'm not sure if I want to use it.
Yeah. If we use examples.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? But you do it for yourself. Go ahead and when you read a headline that makes you feel an emotion, read the article, but read carefully. Breathe through the emotions before you do it. Then read the article to see if it actually validates that.
And try not to read through the lenses of the title.
So Susan says in the legislatures, they had to make a rule that the title of the law would correspond to the actual law. No such law exists for the news media.
No.
That's awesome, Susan.
Wow.
And so crucial, right?
Yeah.
Not only does that law not exist, but actually it's the opposite of that. It's a taught rule of media. I actually read an article of somebody who did media training. They'd gone to school to become a writer for newspapers and magazines. And they gave them different circumstances and told them to write about that circumstance from multiple perspectives. Do you want them to believe it? Do you want them not to believe it? Do you want them to feel angry about it? Do you want them to act? Do you want them to not act? And they were told to write an article about that data that would have all those different influences. So they're taught how to slant their communication to unnaturally get what people might naturally do with pure information. Ooh, makes my skin crawl, makes me a bit frustrated because to me, a significant piece of freedom, again, you'll have seen this on my Twitter feed, a significant piece of freedom is the freedom to make choices, and assumed in the freedom to make choices is the assumption that we have accurate information.
Yeah.
Hence the need for critical thinking and the reason to read behind headlines and to read behind the implications of even the body of an article.
Yeah.
When you feel fear or when you feel anger, what's happening is you're in your brainstem and your capacity to reason and analyze has been significantly reduced, and your willingness to receive and take in kind of a reactive response is primed by the fact that you're in this fight, flight, freeze part of your brain. It's designed to act in an emergency. So headlines are written to make you go, to feel that either fear, oh no, or anger, they did what? And when you feel that from the headline, take a deep breath, you have been manipulated. Even if what's in the article is infuriating, if it's accurate, the headline is designed to pull you into that. Another term for manipulation, right? So fear and anger are the two key ones. And in that particular form, it's the fear and anger of you, the victim, if you will, you, the reader, the listener, the participant. It's your fear and your anger being used against you. Now, some people will use anger to manipulate you. It's called bullying. And when someone uses anger or a kind of blustering position to manipulate you, it's another form of manipulation where one person uses a position or a communication form of power to try to get the other person to respond out of their fear because of my anger.
Yeah.
Right. So fear and anger are key elements. But I wrote down two others. Here's another one. This is a one we have to really watch, and that is acceptance versus rejection. Both of those are emotions. Acceptance versus rejection are key pieces of religiously abusive organizations, cults, and other organizations, including various cultures and communities, where people are trying to coerce behavior through the fear that you will no longer be accepted by that organization, right? So acceptance versus rejection, it's on Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mhm.
right? The number one thing is safety, so fear and anger. The next one is acceptance and relational needs. And so the two basic needs of life are safety and acceptance. And if those two needs aren't met, then everything else about living life in the higher elements of life, we don't move to those places. And so let's see. Yeah. So, highly sensitive person, I've avoided news. Absolutely. You have to choose carefully where you get your information from, Indy.
That's where I
And
got
just,
off Twitter and Facebook.
yeah,
Yeah.
Holly's been doing the same thing, just avoiding kind of the triggering sources of information, which we're the ones that aren't. But anyway, so acceptance versus rejection is one of those things. Again, sometimes it's stated overtly.
Mhm.
Look, you can't be a part of our group if you don't take the oath, if you don't boycott the same people we boycott, if you don't, watch the same shows we watch,
You don't dress the same way.
dress the same way,
You don't use the same words.
believe the same way we do about various
If you
cultural
question
issues.
us,
Oh yeah, yeah. If you ask questions, you really, clearly you're not loyal. Sometimes loyalty is a buzzword to say you won't be accepted because you're not accepting us, so we wouldn't accept you.
Yeah.
As if loyalty means blind, unquestioning acceptance of all statements from anybody in the organization, right?
Yeah.
So it's acceptance versus rejection is one of those things because it's such a core piece of the human soul. What you see is that there's this kind of use of, hey, you won't belong if, you'll be rejected if, or the flip side of that, we'll accept you if you do the things we want, we'll reject you if you don't do the things we want. It's an incredibly powerful force, and you will have seen that force being used throughout the movement towards the Holocaust back in Nazi Germany. There was the we are this race, they are that race. And if you're a sympathizer to that race, then you're less than us and you're more like them because they're less than us. And so you see the use of that. By the way, if you've never been to, I don't know about all of them, but the Holocaust Museum in Israel, it's a long, narrow hallway with rooms off of it. And it's a progression from one end where it began with the normal culture of the Jewish people living in the European, within the European cities, through the beginning of propaganda, through the uptick in propaganda, and then from there it moves to the progression so that when you get all the way to the end of the museum, you're actually standing in one of the ovens where the Jews were killed in the concentration camps. But it's the progression from what's a simple use of manipulation and propaganda all the way through a mass genocide that took place that all of us are aware of. And so, so the danger of that acceptance versus rejection thing is people will sell out their own values for fear of being rejected. People will, things that they stood on, conclusively and with absolute unwavering certainty, if all of a sudden they're no longer going to be accepted by their peer group or by their community or by their culture, you will find,
their family.
or by their family,
Yeah.
the temptation is incredibly powerful to compromise on your beliefs if you see that rejection happens if you hold true to your beliefs. It's a terribly powerful force. So we've got guilt, anger, we've got acceptance versus rejection. And the last one that I put down after we started our demonstration is guilt. Again, to assuage guilt, people will do all kinds of things. So if I really want a piece of cake. If Polly's not dealt with her issues around guilt and shame, I can use her guilt and shame to my advantage by making her feel guilty. Again, starts in families, moves into organizations and institutions, and then from there moves into cultures. The use of guilt is also part of the form of acceptance and rejection.
Yeah.
If you're guilty, what have you done wrong? Do you really belong here? Right. So fear, anger, guilt, acceptance versus rejection, and guilt are the core emotions. Now listen to this. Emotions are drivers. Thoughts are not drivers, no matter what people tell you. And when we do our series, our events on emotional intelligence and healing the emotions or healing the heart that keeps you hooked, we'll talk and give some both evidence and understanding of the driving power of emotions. Thoughts may be the machinery of the mind, or the soul, but the fuel of the soul is our emotions. And so when our emotions are used against us without our thoughts engaging, in other words, covert communication, and one of those 4 emotions being used, it's an incredibly powerful pull to just get in line and do what either the individual, the group, or the culture is asking of us.
Mhm.
That's a simple way to understand, even though there's nothing simple about it. The power of manipulation is that it uses the best attributes of your personhood against you. So, see what else I put down here. See, I think I've said all the things. So,
So how do we respond to manipulation?
Yeah.
What is a way it's like, okay, so you're manipulating me to make you a cake.
Yeah.
You know, which seems simple, but it's not, because it's a big picture of relational discord. And if we play that merry-go-round all the time, he will just keep manipulating and I will keep falling into it, wondering what is wrong with me. I think it was Indy who said something up here that was very well stated about survivors have to navigate this all the time in our everyday conversations, always lots of implications, and are left having to discern and sort out the facts and what is actually being said. And I think you also said something again up here. Let's see here. Survivors technically manipulate their abuser in order to survive in unhealthy dynamics all the time. Sometimes it's done with a healthy purpose. Yeah.
And so one of the things I always tell people is that relationships are made or broken based on a process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, doesn't matter what the topic is, it's the process that makes a relationship either healthy or unhealthy. And yeah, I love the recognition that we end up as survivors of abuse or people who are living in abuse, we end up inadvertently having to play the game in order to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so we develop manipulative strategies in response to a manipulative atmosphere. And it's part of why we as survivors end up feeling so crazy, is because our adaptations forced us to be unhealthy in order to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
So you're choosing dysfunction over safety. At the same time, first recognizing its dysfunction, sit in it long enough, it starts to become normal to you.
Right.
And
it's
when
like boiling a frog.
Yeah, and when it becomes normal, changing an unhealthy thing feels unhealthy because you become so accustomed to the unhealthy that when you start doing healthy things, I know that with my own codependence and people pleasing, that when I started really setting boundaries and holding to that, I felt guilty for finally doing what was healthy.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about what do you do with that for a couple minutes here. The first thing is this: recognizing that most of the communication involved in manipulation is covert or implied. We teach this in our communication classes, and we teach this in our conflict resolution. The most important thing you can do is learn to recognize those covert messages, become skilled at not just instinctively recognizing them, but raise it to a conscious level. Because if it's just instinct, again, the covert messages can still be used against you.
Yeah.
But when it rises to a conscious level, this is where I usually give the assignment Gorillas in the Mist, where you step back emotionally and observe what's happening instead of being a participant. And in observing, what you're looking for is what are the implied messages and what's the goal of the implied messages. Yeah. And as you develop your skills and instincts at knowing consciously what the implication and the covert messages are, that in itself makes it conscious instead of unconscious. The next step, if it's safe to do in relationship, is then you take the covert message, bring it to the overt level, and put the question back on the person.
I think, Mindy, I'm not sure like what your question is, but the way I remember it is covert is covered, is like covered words and covered information. Overt is over that, and it's like being very, it's over above it. And so the covert is the covered message. It's not being, that's the implications are, you have to figure out what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so manipulation is when you look at it, and so he's, just say, you're manipulating me by trying to get me to make you a cake.
Right.
And he's being very covert about that. I would then come back and make it over and say, so do I hear you say that you are hungry for cake?
Yes.
Okay. So is there another way that you could ask me? Because I feel like you're manipulating me right now.
Oh, I'm not manipulating you.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to make you a cake right now. Yeah. So I'm going to go in the other room and I'll talk to you later.
So you're not going to make me a
I'm
cake?
not going to make you a cake.
I was really hoping you would.
I know you are, and that's make you feel very sad that I'm not making you a cake right now. But I think you have other options, and if you're willing to talk about those, let's talk about those. But I feel like you're trying to trick me into making you a cake.
See what she's doing? She's taking the covert. All of my stuff is under the table or covered, like she said. I say all of it. Well, yeah, all of it. I felt like about a 4-year-old. But using the emotions and the weight of my emotions is all covered over. It's not direct. And so she's making it direct and responsive. So taking the covert, making it over, taking the covered and making it obvious, right? And so the other thing we always add to that is take the covert, make it overt, and put it in the form of a question. Because what I'm doing is I'm using my covert communication and my emotions to put a burden on her. Bringing it overt makes it obvious. Asking the question puts it back on me. So manipulate me into something. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. Let's see here.
I've been doing cake all night. So I thought I would stop trying to look like a glutton.
I'm trying to be like, because cake kind of seems silly.
Yeah,
but
that's why I picked it.
Okay, so you always say that that we're gonna go to this place, and you never take me, or you never do any of the things that I want to do, and it's just I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it.
So I think I hear you saying you feel like I only do the things I want to do and don't pay any attention to you. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's true.
So you're saying that your experience so far has been I only take care of me and I don't value you. Is that how you see that?
Right. It's always about you.
Okay.
Never about me.
Well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I feel like there are probably times that we do things for one another or with each other. But it sounds like you don't feel that way. Is that true?
That's true. I want it to be about me for once. Oh God, this is hard. Oh my God.
That's why I picked cake.
Yeah.
It's so much easier.
Yeah, but when you're dealing with an emotional, manipulative person, you know what? Just forget it. You're wanting to have this long talk about this stuff, and you always do that too. And I don't want to have this long talk about stuff. I just want to do stuff for me because it's always about you.
Yeah. So when you say forget it, I have a feeling that you're saying you're going to remember this, but I'm going to pay for it. Is that what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying. This is so hard.
It's so hard. Yeah.
So, no, that's not what I mean at all.
So I shouldn't expect to hear about this anymore if you're going to forget it?
Yeah.
See, that was both a question and a covert maneuver. I shouldn't expect this anymore.
Yep,
what I'm doing is I'm giving back her the weight of that. Mm-hmm. And if she says, yeah, I'm really going to forget it and brings it up again later, now what's happening is I'm going to have to say, so I thought you were forgetting this, or at least that's what you told me. I'm happy to have this conversation if we need to have it. But what I don't want to do is just have you dismiss it without it being finished. Mm-hmm. So see what's happening is try to take that covert, make it overt. When you've got someone like, Polly's
if I was good at manipulation, then I would have been much better at that. I'm glad I'm not good at it.
I'm glad you're not good at it too. I might be a little susceptible.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, did I do that? So, but do you see how the boundary setting piece of that is covert made overt. Now I've gone from implication to explicit communication. That's the other definition of covert. Implication is covert. Explicit is overt. But I've also, in forming it as a question or ending it with a question, I've handed it back to her to say, I'll try to own what's mine, but I want to know if this is really what you're saying. Because if it's really what you're saying, I want you to say it to me directly. Now, listen, in certain cases of abuse, what we're talking about here is not safe.
Right, right.
In just kind of pure manipulative circumstances, it's simply the way to keep things clear instead of muddy, overt instead of covert.
Yeah.
And so So how you recognize it is you first of all have to step back and recognize that language is often manipulated in order to get you to think a certain thing, even when that thing isn't true, to get you to feel something, to get you to, be afraid that you're making someone else feel something. And so the whole part of that is to be able to listen to language and go, what are they really saying?
Mhm.
So
The other thing that's important is I was getting frustrated and angry. You didn't match my frustration and anger.
yeah,
So, a manipulator is after you matching their emotions. And you talked a little bit about that in
yeah,
the beginning. Of them, they're trying to get you to go down in the brainstem so they can get what they want
yeah.
from emotional manipulation.
Which is probably the most difficult part of really responding well to manipulation is staying. And that's why I want to talk about gorillas in the mist. I talk about that 12 inches of emotional separation so that you're not in the exchange, but rather you're watching the exchange and you can go, what meaneth this? She's saying these words. What is she trying to get? What is she after? And can I respond to it in a completely different way than my guts want to? Well, to do that, I have to have enough emotional distance that I'm not going to get down in my brainstem. The same thing, by the way, when you watch media, whether websites, TV, if people still watch that, Twitter, Facebook, all those different things. When you read those different things or see those different things and feel yourself get down into your brainstem, it's time to get away from that stuff and go, what's really happening here? A really intentional manipulator and a good manipulator knows how to get you in your brainstem so that you won't respond out of consciousness and critical thinking. You'll respond out of fear, anger, fear of rejection, or guilt. So the key thing is to give yourself that emotional distance, learn to analyze what's really being said, and what's the intended target of what's being said. If you are prone to that, you can recognize the intended target by recognizing that the internal pull. Oh gosh, I really want to make her feel better. Oh, that's the deal. She wants me to carry the weight of her frustration. Now, if I genuinely am self-centered in the way she's describing, I have to be willing to look at myself. What I don't have to do is carry the weight of her emotions about that as I examine and analyze myself to say, am I really doing that?
So more than likely, if that was something, then you would not have, if that was something in the way that you responded and it was all about you would not have had that kind of conversation with a manipulator.
Yeah.
Because you're already stuck in your level of manipulation of always wanting selfishly to get what you want.
Yeah.
And so people, my accusation is if he was, how do you say this? If he was really doing it, then more than likely my accusation would then trigger his brainstem and we would go round and around and he wouldn't have a conversation of asking the questions of so tell me what you experience when that happens or anything like that. So anyway.
So Anne said, I want to respond to Anne, then I think we need to wrap up.
Yeah, we do.
Anne says it takes a lot of mental energy to stay on top of that conversation. Here's the problem though. You're 100% right. But ultimately, an emotional vampire will wear you down because it takes energy to stand up and be healthy. It's easier to be manipulated than it is to give, it's emotionally less draining on the front end to just give into it. But over the long run, it's draining of your identity to give into manipulation chronically over time. It's well worth the mental energy to say, let me stay conscious and aware than to give it and just go, it's just easier to go along with this stuff. It may be easy in the moment, but it's deadly in the long run.
It is.
One of the things I tell
11 million Jews.
I tell parents, in the moment, it's easy to give into your kid's demand, but what you create is a lifetime of having to give into their demand. Staying on top of it on the front end prevents long-term difficulties over the long haul. So keep your eyes out for manipulation. It's all around us. It is a part of human relationship and human culture. If you want to be free from manipulation, really keep an eye out for covert messages. Learn to recognize your own emotional states and when and how they get triggered, and learn to know the difference between when you're in your brainstem versus when you're up in the upper parts of your brain, and can truly analyze what's taking place and really make a connection instead of a response out of guilt, fear, or shame.
Yeah. And just real quick, and we touched a little bit on, but Mandy just said, like, if she stayed calm, he would lose his mind and it would get way worse. So if you're dealing with an abuser and they use anger and pain and all that kind of stuff for their manipulative control, which the media does too, but physical, then please be very careful in navigating this. Just like file away information and go, I'm being manipulated, and if I start setting these boundaries, it gets worse. So how am I going to make myself safe?
Yeah. When that's the case, it's almost always true that it's time to get out.
Yeah.
Well, it's always true that it's time to get out.
Yeah.
But getting out is also one of the most dangerous times. We do a whole series on abuse over on Think Differently Academy. So if you find yourself in that place, be sure that you avail yourself of some of the training and teaching that we do on the abuse pathway in Think Differently Academy. Yeah. It's not something to take lightly, and it's not safe.
Yeah.
So good to see you guys tonight.
Yes.
And next week, we've got much more to talk about.
Yeah. So y'all have a great night. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.